Deer in New Zealand are becoming a major pest. I can go out on a farm and see up to 500 to 1,000 deer a night. I might shoot 1% of that. They're just everywhere at the moment.
That's hunter Jimmy Ferris from a recent episode of Country Calendar.
Wow, that's a lot. It's probably the biggest number that I've heard.
That's journalist Jill Heron, who's just written a series of stories for Newsroom about the explosion in deer numbers and the severe and possibly permanent damage they're doing to native forest.
Wow. Yeah, and then that's certainly reflective of the reports we've had from our Meat and Wool Council around the country.
And that's Richard Dawkins, Meat and Wool Chair for Federated Farmers. I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Today on The Detail, there are nearly 2 million of them across the country. They cost farms hundreds of millions of dollars in damage and repair every year. They are now spreading to the most precious corners of our native bush. So how do we get deer under control? Jill Heron explains what made her delve into the story.
It was really a combination of things that I've been seeing myself over the last couple of years when I've been out in the backcountry and even just around this area, like the Southern Lakes and Southland, but also just people that I've met through other work that you just keep hearing the same thing from them about the level of damage that's happening quietly out in the bush that you don't see. I think it doesn't really hit you until you see it yourself.
What are you seeing?
Just the number of deer around the place. They're everywhere. And you didn't used to see that, even 10 years ago. Like where I live now in central Otago, I see deer pretty much every second day when I walk my dog down the river or on the council reserve. And just when you go into the bush places in the backcountry, you seem to see a lot more of them than you used to.
And this story that you've done, what stood out for you?
Probably the biggest concern from it that kind of shocked me was the damage to native bush. It's just incredible what they do. They will can just strip out the whole understory of a forest. So there's nothing left there for the birds to eat, and there's nothing left there for the insects to live in. And they sort of talk about the term that people use is canopy collapse when everything's been eaten out underneath. But I mean, in normal terms, what that means is the whole forest falls down and dies, is what that means. And because if the deer and the pigs and the goats are still there, they'll just eat every new shoot that tries to regrow. I mean, the seed's in the ground, but if the pests are still there, it won't come back because they'll just mow off anything that pops up.
It's a problem that needs immediate action, but how to approach it is another matter.
It's just sort of starting to happen. So the government are putting together a coordinated group and getting all the different groups in together. I mean, some people want there to be deer in the bush because they enjoy hunting, which I do myself. It's great fun. But the other end of the scale is some want every last deer to be wiped out. So there's some very, very diverse views in there.
It all began back in 1861, when red deer, imported from Scotland as sports animals, were released into central Otago. Back then, no one thought of the environment, especially here in this colonial outpost, which was relatively pristine at the time. But for deer, this must have been paradise found.
That's Paul Roy from the award-winning RNZ podcast series Deer Wars.
Within 30 years, huge herds in their thousands were taking over the place. And you could see the impact on our native trees and the land.
One landowner who's experienced the ravages of deer is Richard Dawkins. He has a sheep and beef farm near Blenheim, and he's also diversified into viticulture and forestry.
When trees are young, just being planted, they're very susceptible to browsing damage. And unfortunately, we had about 5 hectares chewed out. It's interesting in that, in those forestry blocks, the grass can be sort of knee high, but the deer will come through and pick out the seedlings. they must have a nutrient or something the animals crave, because, they go through and certainly pick them out.
So what was it, one day you went in there and they were all chewed up?
Yeah, we had the crew in to do some release spraying, and obviously we'd noticed a bit of damage in there, but they said, look, the damage is far worse than you expected. So had to do a full replant, but that's reflective of what I'm hearing from my Meat and Wool Council nationwide, and whether it's damage to farm forestry or pastures or crops, it's certainly a theme that's been going on for a few years now, to be honest.
Why is it so bad with deer at the moment?
The lockdowns through COVID, and when you don't have a whole lot of hunting and a whole lot of culling going on, naturally you're going to get a population boom. And another issue we're focusing on at Federated Farmers is the fact that about 1 million hectares of land was actually retired from farming, and those caretakers were taken off the land. And when you remove the farmers and the caretakers, you get a whole lot less weed and pest control going on.
And whose responsibility is that?
So that was handed over under DOC management. Look, I do have some sympathy for the department. They have 8 million hectares to manage and very much prioritise conservation values and targeted areas. So we're really starting to have serious discussions and making progress on saying, hey, there's 1 million hectares that was farmed previously. Ironically, it was retired because it was so well managed. It had conservation values, and unfortunately, all of those parcels of land have actually gone backwards.
You talk about a prediction that 300,000 more animals would need to be eradicated every year for the next 5 years across the board, the pests, to deal to this current population boom?
And that's one of the issues, Sharon, is, believe it or not, there's no solid data out there or information. To be honest, no one really knows the exact number. So estimates we've heard out of the department are possibly around that 1.8 million range, and that is for deer specifically. That's not across all pest or wild animal species. So, the idea is to knock that down, somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000, say. So really, on top of the control work that's been doing currently, like you said, we need about 300,000 more per year. And from what I can gather, that would be 4 or 5 times as much as what recreational hunting takes care of.
Okay, so hang on, those figures, wow. So there's about 1.8 million deer out there at the moment. If you halve it, that's still 900,000 deer. Is that even that a manageable number?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sharon, and it does vary region by region. Like some areas these deer are in, it's very expansive and they're not at high stocking rates as such, but it's when you're getting mobs of 20 or 30 or 50 roaming across productive farmland, it becomes an issue for farmers, but also, of course, in those conservation estates, where there's sensitive flora and fauna, you obviously don't want high populations as well. So just need to be aware of the nuance in the conversation. We're talking about a ballpark national population, but it will vary from region to region and catchment to catchment.
The cost of the damage overall, has Federated Farmers done an estimate of this?
Yes, so we surveyed members, about 700 of our members, just to highlight the control work that farmers were doing, because everyone does have a part to play in this. Pointing fingers isn't really a pathway forward, and we think every landowner has a responsibility, but we certainly found out from our members that there was about $200 million worth of, costs directly related to hunting these animals, but also damage being done to our properties.
Is this the worst it's been, or has it been this bad before?
From what I can gather, in the 70s and 80s, there was a real boom, but there was the commercial outlet then, of course, with the live capture. And from what I understand, with inflated values, inflation adjusted, those fellas were sometimes getting up to $20,000 per deer.
It was good money. You can make $10,000 a week in those days.
Yeah, money was good, but it just slipped through our fingers. Couldn't handle it.
Prices went up and up and up.
Well, we're 2 bob millionaires. We thought this was going to last forever. But nothing ever lasts forever.
Free market solutions, commercial solutions are always the best. That was a real incentive for people to get out there on the land and control the problem.
Yeah.
Now, commercial venison recovery is picking up, but those fellas would likely tell you they're certainly not getting $20,000 a deer, right?
It might be everyone's problem, but there's no consensus on how to solve it. Some say there is no acceptable limit for deer. They must be eradicated.
There's a wide range of views around, let's say, deer in particular, from absolute hatred to highly valued for a number of reasons. So no matter what people like myself say, we're going to upset or offend somebody or some people.
John Bissell runs Backblock's environmental management in Wairarapa, specialising in pest and predator control. I speak to him just before he heads off hunting.
I'm a mix of consultancy and advisory, but also boots on the ground. So, this afternoon or this evening, I'm actually heading out on a deer control job, actually, to remove deer from small remnant bush where they're having a noticeable impact.
Do you get contracted by farmers to go out and do this control work?
It's a variety of clients, but increasingly I'm getting phone calls from farmers themselves. And when you look at the cost of having ungulates on your farm through lost production and dry matter consumption, and by ungulates I mean cloven hooved animals, which is deer, goats and pigs. It's not just a deer conversation. Farmers in many areas around the country are reaching the conclusion that they can't afford not to do control rather than can't afford to do it, if that makes sense. It's hitting them in the back pocket noticeably more and more in a larger and larger number of properties around the country, for sure. Yeah, there's a real variation in people's views and opinions. That, I think, is one of the main reasons why we are struggling to come up with a suitable resolution to this issue, because every area is different, every landscape is different, every community is different. One of the greatest challenges is that the varying sides in this topic don't really seem to be engaging and talking directly. Everyone seems to be circling each other. The best way to describe it for me is that many ways hunting and conservation are viewed separately. The reality is that a lot of the people that I've worked for and with who are doing incredible conservation work are also very keen hunters, and they're finding some real challenges in this space as well.
What kind of challenges?
In conservation, one of our greatest strengths is our passion and our enthusiasm and the emotion that we put into everything that we do. And I also think in conservation, one of our greatest weaknesses is exactly the same thing. Unfortunately, when it comes to this conversation, I think that we are going to need to apply a degree of pragmatism, and we are going to need to understand that at times the pursuit of excellence can be the enemy of good enough. What we've been doing with deer in this country up to this point, and in my opinion, is we've been totally mismanaging them by and large. And that's due to a number of factors. They are legally classified as pests. There's a 007 on them in any of our national parks and many of our public conservation areas. What that means is that any control of those animals has been tied strictly to taxpayer dollars or the price of venison per kilo. And what we've seen over the years is a real boom and bust cycle with regard to deer management. And if deer get reduced down because the price goes up, then the forest starts to recover. But if the price goes down on venison, then the commercial take reduces and the deer bounce back faster than the forest does. What we actually need to do is agree area by area in this country on a suitable management regime and population density targets, and then work out how we're going to achieve that. The actual reality in this conversation is that we cannot afford to do effective deer control throughout this country in the way that we need to. And this is where hunter-led organisations come into play.
What John's talking about there are organisations like the Wapiti Foundation, Fish and Game, and the Deer Stalkers Association. They're behind some very contentious legislation around herds of special interest that manages and protects certain wild deer breeds. Conservationists say it will threaten sensitive plant species. Hunters say it is the best way to control deer numbers.
Our members and hunters throughout the country are passionate about conservation. They're out there every weekend doing their bit. They see the damage that can be done. They also see the good that can be done by working with other partners, with DOC, with TTP and local bodies to help manage those numbers.
Conservation first approach is the most important thing. So the land has to be healthy, the environment has to be healthy. And then we have healthy animals that come out of that, but not too many of them.
John Bissell reckons we should give it a go.
And there's some real philosophical challenges for many conservationists in that space, because to allow that to happen philosophically for conservationists is to admit that actually we can't get rid of deer and that we're going to have to put up with a few of them in some of our special areas that we hold so dear. No pun intended. But it's a real challenge for conservationists. I see people with that are really wringing their hands over this, and I see a lot of battles and a real sliding scale, even within conservation and hunting circles, about what should be done. For me personally, the greatest threat to resolving this conversation and this issue are the extremes on both sides of the equation. What we need to do is get people who have a balanced view, who can get together in a room, who they might not necessarily agree with, and seek a suitable outcome that will work in the interests, first and foremost, of the environment, but also in the interests of communities as well. While we procrastinate and argue in the way that I've seen so much of this happening of late, it's the ngāhere that's suffering.
John, we're never going to get rid of the deer, are we, completely?
Not with the tools that we have. I mean, these are an introduced species. They've been here in most cases for over 100 years now, and we're really no closer to coming up with a suitable resolution for this issue than we were back in 1929 when they were officially declared a pest for the first time. So my question to everyone is, what have we got to lose by trying something new or different? And doing things differently, or admitting or allowing philosophically a population of deer to be in some of these protected spaces, is not an admission of failure in my personal viewpoint. I think what we need to do is actually agree on what a suitable density of each species in each area looks like to enable forest regeneration, and then work out how we're going to achieve that. But the reality is, if you look at the scale and size of this issue, we aren't going to achieve that with taxpayer dollars alone. We need all the help that we can get from herds of special interests and the foundations that are managing them. To me, is something that I'm quite keen to see put in place and give it a go.
Richard Dawson says farmers are working with the Ministry for Primary Industries on a new feral animal browsing program.
There's various work streams they're looking at. One is aerial culling in hotspots. Another is really empowering wild animal recovery. So that's commercial venison. There's a bit of red tape and regulation which is sort of holding back the numbers that they can control. Also looking at other pest management strategies such as hunting competitions and initiatives like that as well. But it's just great to have the department recognising the seriousness of the issue.
This is the thing that I, find a bit weird actually, is that on the one hand, we've got these pests that are doing so much damage, and yet, on the other hand, we've got a culture that celebrates hunting.
Yeah, and it's finding that correct balance, right? And that's the nuance in the conversation. Saying deer are absolute pests and should be eradicated, well, A, that's not practical, but B, it's not helpful either. A portion of Kiwis really value these animals for recreational values and for hunting. But I really want to highlight that recreational hunting, it's not a complete solution. It's certainly a tool in the toolbox, and we should empower that and encourage it. But the numbers of deer that need to disappear, need to be culled, it's way beyond what we can achieve with recreational hunting. And that's why MPI have come on board and sort of said, hey, what are we going to do about this?
So encouraging a more commercial style hunting?
Yeah, so wild animal recovery, commercial venison recovery is again another tool in the toolbox, but not a complete solution. You need a certain density, a certain number of deer for that to be commercially viable. As you can imagine, flying around a helicopter comes at significant expense. So it's about getting these animals down to manageable levels where they're not having such serious impacts on our farms.
Is that it, really? Is it, getting up in helicopters and culling them and encouraging competitions? Is there not 1080?
So from what I understand, 1080 isn't actually approved for deer control, and then that would also have impacts on the ability to use that meat. So it's about utilising and empowering the tools that are available. But look, it's also recognising that we've got to this situation, we've got to this explosion in pest numbers because the management on the ground, isn't sufficient. And that's why we're highlighting this 1 million hectares that has been retired from farming. Hey, that management needs to change. We need caretakers back on that land. But then also, we have other landowners. We have forestry, we have farmers, we have hunting blocks, we have the wider Department of Conservation estate. So moving forward, MPI can empower these groups. They can run aerial culling. But if that day-to-day management doesn't change, then we're going to be back to square one in no time. So that's part of the conversation too. How do we actually encourage everyone to play their part moving forward?
Jill Heron's latest report reveals deer are invading precious remnants of ancient forests in Southland. But she says no one she knows talks about eradication.
Quite possibly because it would be extremely hard to do. But, hunting and food gathering, because it's free protein, is a huge part of New Zealand culture now. And I don't think people would want to see that go either. It's more a manageable number.
Do people think that this group that the minister is pulling together, that the government's pulling together, is going to solve this?
It's definitely a really good move and needs to happen. I think what they worry about is that it might take a while and, be a sort of a report in an office, and whereas it's on the ground now, it needs to be happening with some reduction in numbers. I think that's really the concern.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Today's podcast was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Ben Pearce. Thanks to Jill Heron, Richard Dawkins and John Bissell. I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Ka kite.